I'm Clay Harrold, a special education teacher and activities director here at North Cedar High School. Today I'm sitting down and talking with Angie Wood, my career teacher that I selected for the I Evaluate course. This is Monday, October 1st. Last Thursday, the 27th of October, we had a pre-observation where we sat down and talked about some of the questions that I formulated to generate some ideas and some things that Angie has been working on in her new Fusion curriculum reading class. And I observed the class on Friday morning, September 30th, and took away some information from that. And today we're meeting on the 1st of October, and we're going to be talking about and kind of discussing and going back and forth with some ideas about the observation and about the class and how, what things worked, what things we can improve on, how we can move forward into the future. So just to give a little background information about this class, it is a class, it's a new, the program is called a Fusion Reading Program. It is a class it's an English class. The students get an English credit for it, and there are 11 students in the class. All of them have IEPs, nice and loud in here for the trains that always go by. There are 11 students in the class. They all have IEPs. Their reading levels range from the 7th grade ability level on up. The students also range in age. There are some freshmen all the way up to seniors in high school, and they were hand selected for this class. I've observed this class twice now, and the first time that I observed it, I know we talked about how there was a good chunk of time that was spent in review every day about vocabulary and about some of the reading that they had done the previous days. And Angie noted that the reviews are good to self-assess and prepare them for the lessons that are to come. And the ways that their students are engaged are through questioning and individual writing that I witnessed. It does keep all the students engaged, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, how much time students spend in engagement and how much time that they may not be, or etc. Materials, the students they all have a binder notebook, steno pad, and reading text. And there is a big push for technology in this classrooms. They use smart boards on a regular basis, and I think that helps keep the students engaged. Concerns about the activities or the class, the timing of the lessons sometimes get a little bit gummed up because the students do work at different paces. They all, like we said, have individual education plans, and they all kind of comprehend and move at a different pace, so sometimes that can be tricky. How do we know the students are comprehending the material? Just through general questioning, vocabulary quizzes, and then they have to write in their notebooks on a regular basis. Feedback from the students. Feedback that is gained, from this questioning and assessments and that type of thing is used to make adjustments in the classroom. Where we go from here, sometimes students are retaught information. One student in particular rewrites information on note cards, and that student actually has been able to obtain 100% accuracy on vocabulary quizzes into the future, so that has been quite productive. For my information purposes, I provided Angie with information going into the observation. I told her that I was going to be focusing on student responses to teacher questions and just overall student engagement. And I did prepare a room chart that I plotted, and I did a room sweep every 5 minutes, and got some information based on the feedback that I saw from the students. So we're going to move forward into our observation here. So first off, Angie, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
And Angie, I don't think I did a whole lot of discussion here. Angie's been a mentor to me this is my 4th year at North Cedar now, and she's almost been like a big sister. She's been very, very helpful, and we both teach in the special ed department. She teaches more of the life skills. I have more of the behavior type students, but I have students that are in my program that are in Angie's classes and such. So been a lifesaver to have someone with her expertise and to learn from. So
as well as you to me. We make a nice support group for each other.
well, I guess if you think so. All right, some of just some overall, just some objective type questions. You know, in this particular lesson that I witnessed on Friday, you know, what were some of the learning goals that you set place for the students through your instruction?
Some of the biggest learning goals were to see what they retained in the vocabulary that we've already taught. We taught, no, that's not when we had the quiz. No, we had the quiz the day before. And Friday was our new word. So after 10 words, then they're going to be quizzed on. So the learning objective is that they learn the prefixes, the regular prefixes that are used over and over again, and the regular suffixes that are used over and over again. So basically all they have to do is to identify the root word, and once they identify the root word, they can break it down, they can learn how to spell it, and then hopefully be able to diagnose the word to see what the definition is.
Did you ever collect evidence or artifacts from the students to see, not only just to hear them spelling these words and that type of thing like I witnessed, but do you see their actual work on more than just the assessments?
Every day, when it comes to the part of the lesson, can you think of any other words that have the same prefix? Can you think of any other words that have the same suffix? Over time, the students have been much more willing to, step out on that limb and give us words that, today our word was, the prefix was audi. And almost everybody in the class could think of another word that started with A-U-D-I, auditorium, audiologist. They did a nice job. So, yeah. That's probably the biggest way that we collect information is by student volunteering.
Great. So it sounds like the objectives that you set were pretty much met. Care to elaborate on that at all?
I think the students do well in a situation in which they know what's going to happen. They don't deal well with surprises. So if they can come into an environment in where there's some consistency, they know what the class is going to be like. They're in there for 45 minutes. And the first part of the lesson they know is going to be the daily warm-up. The second part of the lesson is going to be the vocabulary. And then the new vocabulary. And then the third part of the lesson is going to be the reading. So they really do a nice job when they know what's going to be expected of them.
Okay. With it being a new class, did it take a long time to build that routine? I mean, we've been in school for over a month now, but how long did it take just to try to, get the students, because they did a very nice job when it was time to transition into something else. The transition times were very short. They were able to get moving very quickly.
I'd say by the second or third day, once they realized, okay, we did this yesterday. Okay, we did this last 2 days. Oh, I bet we're going to do this tomorrow too. So once they realized that it was going to be the same thing every day, they developed a little bit more confidence that they knew what was going to be coming. They knew they had to have their pencils out and they had to have their notebooks out ready to go. They do a nice job when they know what to expect.
Like I said, I focused primarily on responses, student engagement in the responses to questions, and just their overall engagement. Like I said, I did a room sweep. I'll kind of talk about my chart's actually right here. Basically, what I did is I kind of made a room chart. A seating chart.
Yeah.
Billy, Alex, Andrea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every 5 minutes, and I wrote down the time. I started at 8:20, and then I did a room sweep, and I would focus on Billy. Example. I would start with him, and I started with the same student every single time. At 8:20, I would look at him, and I would just note his engagement. I would watch him for 5 to 10 seconds just to see how engaged he was. Then I would move on to Alex. Okay, and I'd focus on that student, and then I'd move to Andrea, or whoever. Actually, that's not the way seating chart goes. It goes that way. And I just kind of noted, were they on task, were they off task?
And as I'm looking at this, it's very easy to read. It's exactly what I would see on a daily basis. I'm looking at this one back here, who doesn't have both of these two. They don't have a lot of, they're the ones that we need to redirect back to task quite often.
Sure.
So when we think about a new seating arrangement at the beginning of the second quarter,
Right.
And it's not that they talk to each other, I think it's just their engagement.
Sure. And these, just so you can kind of understand this information a little more, when I was doing a room sweep, sometimes when I was focusing on a student, it was hard to hear, what you were necessarily saying, or maybe if another student was answering. So these arrows coming out from your name and are actually the questions that you asked.
Okay.
And these numbers, these arrows pointing back, are the number of times that I heard when I wasn't focusing on a student particularly, that I noted that, you know, a student responded directly. And sometimes, you know, like I said, I missed some. This is very, you know, that information, the actual questioning, you know, it would probably, for myself, I would need to come back and just focus on the questioning again. If I were to do this again, I would need to do that. But the actual engagement information is about as correct as I could make it based on a 5-minute sweep, or a sweep every 5 minutes, and a 5 to 10 focus on each student. Your overall student engagement was 85% for the class, which is really good because, like I said, all the students have an IEP and they all have different ranges of ability levels. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, 6 of the 11 students had 100% engagement. For, you know, and I did 8 sweeps. So every 5 minutes, that's 40 minutes. I mean, that was, you know, the class periods are only 45 minutes long. So, I mean, that
They were pretty engaged.
They're very, very engaged. You know, we had an 88%. I did notice this student in the back. And I, just from, I mean, he's probably the lowest achieving student in the class.
This is a student, these both are students with mental disabilities. So I would expect that from him.
Sure, sure. But no, I mean, overall, outstanding engagement. I was very highly impressed with like I said, when I asked you about you know, how quickly did the students pick up the routine and the consistency there. I mean, their transition times were excellent. When you moved from your vocabulary review into, you know, the new words and into the different activities that you were doing, I mean, it was very fast and very efficient. So that's a good thing, a definite positive thing. What do you think helped? I mean, we already kind of talked about this a little bit, but outside of the consistency factor in the routine, what do you think helps foster that involvement? What gives you such a high percentage?
I think prior knowledge, for one thing. What they already know, the vocabulary that they already know, the book that we're reading. You know, some of the kids have lived that type of life. They know what, you know, the main characters are going through. So I think a lot of it's prior knowledge.
Okay. Awesome.
And I think also, I think that the students being on the same level, well, I mean, it's a diverse level, but they're all achieving consistently below their peers in reading comprehension, and most of them in writing. So they feel a little bit more secure in giving their knowledge. So I think that has to do with it too. So, but the main one probably is prior knowledge.
Sure. Okay. How do you think, you know, 6 out of 11 with 100%, another with 80-some%, I mean, outstanding overall. How do you think, is there any ideas that come off that jump at you off the top of your head? How do you get almost more engagement? I know you talked about, you know, redirecting these 2 students, for example, and is there anything that just jumps out at you right away, knowing these students and knowing what their ability levels are and such, something that you might try, just having some feedback like this?
Maybe breaking the class in half. That way they have more opportunity to respond. I think they all like to respond, but sometimes the more vocal ones are the ones that, you know, they get the attention. The other ones, I think, know answers, but they're just more quiet,
Right.
more reserved. So I think maybe if we broke the class into half, like a class of 5 and a class of 6.
Okay.
So, and then, you know, Lori will take one group and I'll take the other group. I think that we'd have more engagement.
Okay. Do you notice any, along the lines of engagement, do you notice any body language differences when you're doing, you know, vocabulary review over compared to a new vocabulary, or when you're actually reading the text itself? Do you notice anything from the students, something that, I mean, things that they may just be more actively engaged in just because they enjoy it more, or, I mean, are you seeing anything like that, or is it still too early to tell?
I don't really see that. I do see differences in different kids. One student, well, his body language, but it's pretty much that way the whole entire 45 minutes.
Okay.
Whereas another student will be sitting upright and paying attention. The other one may be more leaning back and more relaxed.
Sure.
But not differences in the kids,
Okay.
no.
Well, that's good. Okay. Are there any tasks or assessments you could add to the end of an activity to enrich the concepts? Like, you know, obviously, you know, they're learning this class, they're gaining some consistency. Are you feeling, you know, based on, you know, your teaching experience, are there any things that you might want to try to add or implement, you know, as the students, you know, get more comfortable and get into their role a little bit more? Anything you might want to try to add to it?
Well, we could have them in terms of vocabulary. They could use the vocabulary sentences in a sentence related to another class. Biology, parenting and relationships, foods class. They could use the vocabulary words, because right now they're allowed to write any sentence they choose, the 2 sentences a day. But we could put some more constraints or limitations on that. Also, in terms of reading the text or reading the book, they could actually write, like journal. What would you do if you were, Max, in this situation? What would you do if you had a dad in jail? So I think that would maybe allow them to use their imagination a little bit more. And then assessing their reading comprehension, we could use the Jamestown readers on a regular basis to, like once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, to see how they're performing at their grade level. See if they're showing any improvement, knowing that they've learned prefixes, knowing that they've learned suffixes, see if it helps their comprehension at all.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, linking the vocabulary to the comprehension would be huge, obviously. That's what it's all about.
I'll be curious to see when we do the ITED tests, or the Iowa assessments, to see how the vocabulary changes.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that not only is this fusion program starting at the high school level, but we are implementing corrective reading at both the elementary and the middle school levels. It's kind of it's a joint program, and it is going to be interesting to see how the standardized test scores how they improve. So ideally they do. The one other part that I wanted to talk about before we go into some more reflective, some more now decisional type questions are, we talked about the on task, the 85%, that type of thing. Out of the questions that you asked, you can see, right away there are some students that, asked a lot or responded a lot of times, or maybe even asked a question of their own. And then there were a few students that only responded once. Every student did respond at least more than once, so they were, engaged in the conversations, and some of them actually, I could tell they had responses, and they just, like you said, the more vocal student might have beat them to the punch, or, raise their hand a little bit more quickly, or that type of thing. How would you, how do you make sure that you keep, because this student in particular, she's so quiet. It's almost like you have to pry it out of her. How do you engage all those students to try to balance that scale a little bit?
I think it's getting to know the students. I think one-on-one is huge. This student in particular is very, very low on self-confidence. So she, answering a question is just so difficult for her because she's so afraid she's going to be wrong. So lots of times she won't even respond. The same is with him. He's a 9th grader that's new this year, and my perception of him at the beginning of the year is totally different than what it is now. He's not at all what he appeared to be. But I think we get more responses out of those students if we, instead of calling on the kids who have their hands raised, but if we go around the room. I have this student in a spelling class, and we go around the room to spell the words aloud, so she knows when it's going to be her turn. So she can kind of, it's predictable. She knows it's coming. She knows she's going to have to do it. So I don't know whether she works up her courage to do it, but I think that's the way of getting maybe a little bit more even, balanced response.
Perfect. Exactly. Okay. Kind of moving on into now decisional type things based on some of the facts you gained and some of the things we talked about. With as far as decisions go, kind of now what with a new reading program, sometimes that brings its own, students are in a new class, it can bring a new energy to anything. Sometimes when you just do things new, sometimes it just sparks an interest. How do you sustain energy in the students that the unique fusion program brings? How do you keep them, the engagement was awesome. How do we sustain that and maybe even possibly build on it? Where can we get energy from?
I think it all comes down to knowing the students. I think is what it comes down to, building that trust with, especially this group of kids. All of these kids, this is the first period of the day, starts at 8:15. Every one of these students are in their desk ready to go at 10 after 8. They have 5 minutes that they could be out in the hall, talking to their friends at their locker, down at breakfast. Every single one of these students are ready to go at 8:10. And they start showing up about 8 o'clock. And I think with these kids, it's the time for socialization. Not just with each other, but they come in and they talk to us to the teachers, to the staff members, to the adults. And they get that one-on-one interaction, or they'll even join in